So let's talk a little bit about private property in general. You know, John Locke, and this is back in the 1600s, he was the first to really conceptualize, and there were many philosophers that followed him, but he was the first to conceptualize the right of private property, the right to own private property by everybody, not just the monarchs, not just by the elites. And that began really the revolution in private property, the kind of the end of serfdom and the beginnings, the very beginnings of the rise of the middle class, right? The landed peasants, so to speak. And private property is a finite resource, folks. What is worth most? What is most scarce? There's only so much land on the planet. Only so much land in each country, on each continent. And it has value. And obviously what you can do with that land in terms of agricultural land, grow food and other agricultural commodities which make money, or to mine, or to timber, or to use the water resources. I mean, I can go all the way down the line. You know what they are. We're going to be going over it in great detail next week. But also a place to build your home, not their home that you're renting, not their home as in the olden days, 500-600 years ago, the Middle Ages, where you were given your cottage and you worked the fields in return. You were an indentured servant. You were really a slave. You were a slave to food. You were a slave to lodging. You were a slave to the landed gentry, to the monarchs, to the elites. And you know, history always repeats, and this is pretty much where they want to go back to the future, you know, the old movie, right? So let's go over, rather than spend a lot of time on the philosophers, John Locke and some of the others throughout the 18th century, where private property to be owned by everybody as a right of everyone to own really got its legs, began to manifest itself, and is now the cities and the suburbs and all the rural properties that you see throughout the planet and here in the United States. So follow me on this, because nothing is an accident. There are no coincidences. Everything is interrelated. So 76 through 80, right? 1976 through 1980, Jimmy Carter, a progressive. I mean, yes, a peanut farmer. I mean, he knew the value of land, right? He grew peanuts on land. And under him, and you could chalk some of this up to he was inept, and some of it up to his progressive thoughts, and some of it up to his incompetence. But what did you have? You had inflation, and you had high interest rates. And what did that do to the ability to own property, the ability to own a home, the ability to maintain a home? You had energy scarcities, right? Long lines at service stations, high gas for that period of time, cheap compared to now. And that put a strain on resources and finances of the average person. And it made it more difficult for them to purchase property and to keep property. Many homes were lost in that time period, and was followed by a big recession, and more homes were lost. And then in 86, you had the S&L debacle. And there was an additional wave of, shall we say, home ownership lost. Now, during this time period, you had all sorts of new household formation. People getting married, having kids. In other words, you had a condensing of the demand for property. Because as new households are formed, they need property, but let's face it, if two people come together into one house, you don't need two dwellings anymore, you need one. Now that whole situation has been reversed in common times, we'll call it, really since about the turn of the millennium, but particularly accelerating after the great financial debacle of 2007, 8, and 9. We'll get there in just a moment. And then after everybody was kind of unsettled, shall we say, the foundation was kind of rendered a little bit askew. There were cracks in the foundation walls of private property ownership by the common man through the 70s and the 80s. Then in 1990, we had the beginnings of, well, there's always a globalist movement, but we had the beginnings of it starting to surface. Think about Elder Bush down there in Rio de Janeiro, signing on to the global compact down there, right? With I think it was 192 other countries. But the United States signing on to globalism, that's really what it was. The Bushes are globalists, both the elder and the younger Bush. And in 1994, you had really the formations, the beginnings of the WEF, right? Our buddy Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. And you had China admitted under the wings of Bill Clinton and the neocons here that were running the country. You know, they were wanting to help this poor, struggling, developing nation, you know, take its seat at the table of nations along with the United States and the rest. And they were admitted to the World Trade Organization. In other words, we were fostering today's enemy back then. We were giving them their legs. And there is no way that the people in charge could not have foreseen what might happen over the course of time relative to the American economy, the Chinese economy, and, shall we say, giving birth to a rival superpower. I mean, the history of China was well known. The amount of people they have is well known. Their patience and their smarts is well known. Then in 2000, you had the dot-com bubble, right? The markets went down. Real estate cratered. You had interest rates go up. You had all sorts of things going on, kind of a repeat of the 1979 through 1982-83 period, when interest rates, if you remember, Paul Volcker raised them almost to 20%. I mean, I unfortunately am of the age where I remember that. But you had the same thing happen on steroids in some cases because people's investments were being wiped out in this dot-com bubble. And you know, if your investments are wiped out and your capital is wiped out, you have less money. And you have less money to pay inflationary costs of home ownership, of property ownership, and of a host of other things. And that widened the crack in the foundations of private property, the ability to afford and to purchase and to live and to enjoy private property. And then you have 2007 through 2009, the great financial crisis, the GFC, as the economists like to call it. This was entirely foreseeable. It was entirely avoidable. And we can get back into the weeds. I am really familiar with this stuff. One day I'll tell you the story why. But bottom line is the progressives in Congress decided that everybody should own a home. I mean, that was the cloak that they used. But what they were really doing was undermining the entire private property market for every common man. They were just pretending that they were helping those who didn't have property. And they had all sorts of things, you know, the subprime mortgages and no down payments and no credit checks. And there was an outfit called Franklin Savings. And they used Franklin Savings and supposed racial, you know, redlining, which was not loaning to people who lived in a certain zip code because in the words of Dodd, the senator, and Maxine Waters, oh, there she is, way back then, you know, wrecking havoc. This was racist, and this was, you know, it wasn't, they didn't call it DEI at that time, diversity, equity, and inclusion. but it was really kind of the forerunner of what we're facing right now. And they put in all these policies supposedly to help people buy homes, when in the end, it undermined everybody's ability to buy a home, to own a home, and to take comfort in their home, not only as a place to live, but as a store of wealth, as an investment, and to be able to afford the maintenance of that investment, the insurance, the taxes, the mortgage, the interest rates, you name it. And then we come to, oh, by the way, it was also at that time that the WEF kind of takes off, right? It sprouts wings, and the plan begins to formulate. Klaus Schwab writes his book, and they begin to designate the young global leaders. I've brought you those stories both on the radio, and we'll get back to it here in the videos. Trudeau and Macron and Obama and that whole crowd. This is when it all started to take shape, because that 2007 to 2009 debacle, that made the cracks in the foundation of common people being able to own private property even wider. It destabilized the market. It rendered asunder the balance of income and assets to ability to maintain those assets, i.e., your home, your private property, your private real estate. Then, of course, we have COVID. And, if Hillary Clinton had been elected in 2016, this would all have been accelerated. Trump kind of threw a monkey wrench into the process. His election wasn't expected at all by anybody. George Soros once said that the election of Trump was the worst thing that could have ever happened to the plans of the globalists. I'm summarizing what he said, but it was a speech he gave at the WEF after Trump's election. And this is what they believe, and this, of course, is manifesting itself in they're doing anything and everything, including treasonous things, as we've discussed, to keep him off the ballot, to stop you from exercising your votes as guaranteed under the Constitution. It is absolute, positive treason. And the undermining of the American middle class and the American middle class's ability to own property, to have their own home, to be comfortable and secure in that home, and be able to, without strain and without stress, afford that home. The interference with that is also treason in my mind, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness is founded in the ability to own private property, amongst other things. I mean, John Locke and the other philosophers of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries were very clear on this. The founders were clear on this when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the amendments which shortly followed. And then, of course, we have COVID. Oh, yes, the conjurer of COVID. I have a really interesting video that I'm going to link to this video, and it's by Dr. David Martin, and it's an address he gave to the European Parliament in May of 2023. It's only 21 minutes. I really suggest you watch it. You can go to the ontherightside.radio.com site. It will be on that site too, underneath the audio bar. And he has several others I'll run over the next few weeks, both for the radio show and the video. This guy has it nailed. He has it nailed as to what went on, as to the shenanigans when it comes to COVID and it comes to the treason that was committed around the gain of function, the, in my mind, intentional, he says simply, release of this manufactured SARS, S-A-R-S, coronavirus, not naturally occurring, right? All man developed, and going all the way back, as you will hear, because he has all the facts and figures, back to the mid-1990s, which coincides with Oh, that's right. Kind of the burgeoning, the coming out, the initial exposures of the globalist movements, including the WEF and like organizations, the increase in power of the UN, the formulation and increase in power of the WHO. So in COVID was a test of control, and it was blatant election fraud. Each and every person who was involved in COVID had a, shall we say, a number of goals. Some were strictly they wanted to put money in their pocket. You know, Fauci and the crew getting their royalties, etc. Big Pharma getting paid by the government. Your tax money bought all those jabs because the government administered them, folks. Oh, and by the way, gave bonuses to doctors and hospitals for doing it and for following their quote unquote treatment protocols. And if you didn't follow the protocols, I've had this on my shows, then you were dinged money by the government. And you were paid at each step of the evolution of a COVID illness in a human being. You were paid for the admission. You were paid for the diagnosis. You were paid if you had to put them in the hospital. You were paid if you had to put them on a respirator. You were even paid if they died. $13,000 per quote unquote COVID victim. I mean, all of this is treason. And those are rules, by the way, promulgated by the government, the CDC, with the NIH, Fauci, etc. in the background. And in the meantime, they're getting their royalties on the jabs the government purchased with your tax money and mandated illegally that you take. Untested, unauthorized. That's treason. And along those lines, it wreaked havoc in people's ability to buy and afford housing, private property, your personal residence. You couldn't move. You couldn't go see anything. Everything was shut down. You couldn't go out and earn money to qualify for a mortgage. And then, of course, the pent-up demand, which they were absolutely knew was going to happen. I mean, this is basic economics, right? To think that, look, you can think that the people who are in control illegitimately of this government right now, and were in control of the deep state, the bureaucracy of the government at that time, you could think that they're stupid, that they're morons. They're not either one of those things. They are diabolical, they are clever, they have a plan. They don't always execute it very well. They don't always think of the unintended consequences, but they have a plan. And the plan is to eventually divest you of your private property and to have you live in a smart city, you know, where you're 15 minutes away. It's so convenient in your government cubicle, getting your government rations and spending your government-controlled CBDC. Now, you may think I'm a wild-eyed conspiracy theorist, but I'll tell you what, the facts are the facts. And when you stitch them all together, they are a tapestry right in your face of the blanket that is being woven, quite purposely woven. And think about what happened during COVID. They began to get people used to getting direct payments from the government. They began to get people used to not paying their mortgages, you know, the forbearance, or not paying their rents, which of course, obviously undermines landlords and therefore private property by the middle class. Think about all those tendrils, if you will, and listen to Dr. David Martin's speech, because then you'll really understand how insidious this was and how far back the plan goes. And then we have post-COVID. Now look, any beginning economist, I mean, I'm just a hayseed in Wyoming, but I know that what you have more of is worth least. If there's more hay in the market, each bale of hay is worth less. If there's more cattle on the market, each cow is worth less. And I can go on and on down the list of commodities and things. It doesn't necessarily have to be land or anything else. If there's more cars on the market, you can buy a car for less. And if there's more dollars circulating, i.e., in the market, each dollar is worth less. And that's inflation. It's not the increase in value of your house or of the food or of the fuel, the gas, the heating, the electrical, whatever. It is the decrease in value of the purchasing agent, which is the dollar. And the more dollars you print, the more inflation you have, the less value each dollar has, which of course does what? It undermines the finances of the common man, the middle class. And if your finances are undermined, then you are less likely to be able to purchase, and you are certainly less likely to be able to keep and maintain private property. And of course, during all this time, power is being moved to China by the big corporations in conjunction with the government, the oligarchy, if you will. Or as Mussolini back there in World War II said, the marriage of state and corporations, which, by the way, is called fascism. And this is when the internal attack on the dollar began with the printing of this money. They knew damn well it was going to devalue the dollar, i.e., increase inflation. And then they followed up with a host of other, some pundits say, stupid decisions. No, intentional decisions, like undermining the dollar as the reserve currency of the planet by stealing Russia's assets, which were parked in United States Treasury bonds. Only a fool would think that the rest of the countries on the planet would sit there and go, oh, I could be next. And only a fool would think that the consortium of countries watching what was being done to Russia, which was theft, right? It's theft by the United States government. We're taking what belongs to somebody else. Is not going to undermine everybody's confidence in the United States financial system and the United States dollar. I mean, you can't be that stupid. Therefore, what you do must be intentional. And then you get into the whole thing of the last 3 or 4 years, where number one, people were locked down and getting checks. Number two, the dollar is under attack internally by domestic traders within the government. And then you have the lip service that's being paid by the Federal Reserve, who created the inflation by printing the money to begin with, about how they need to fight inflation. And you have them raising rates from 0, which they should have never been, to 5.25% in the space of months, fastest ever, really in the history of any economy, certainly in the history of the United States economy. And this creates what? More pressure on small business, which is your average guy who owns a home, whether in suburbia or in the city or rural, it doesn't matter. And what else does it do? Well, obviously, it undermines finances, which means it's more difficult for the average guy to hold on to what he has, including his private property and his home. And because of the inflation, the value of homes goes up, not your ability to pay the insurance, to pay the maintenance, to pay the fuel costs, to pay the electrical costs. That doesn't go up. That takes a gut punch. But the value of your home goes up. And what does that mean? That means less people can buy your home. It's even more illiquid, and real estate is an illiquid asset. It's not an asset that you can simply trade on a moment's notice, that you can sell with the snap of your fingers. It takes time to buy and to sell. And the higher priced it is and the higher the interest rates, the more difficult it is to sell. And if you need to sell because of the inflation and everything else that's going on, because you can't pay to maintain your asset, you get into trouble and you lose your asset. You know, there's a whole host of companies out there right now that are going to people who are in trouble. They're going through all the records. You're 3 payments behind at a mortgage company or whatever they happen to be watching, and they're watching everything. And they go to you and they say, listen, we are here to help you. You know, I mean, we just have your best interest in mind. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to pay all your back payments, and we're going to kind of step into the mortgage with you. And everything's going to be cool. And we're just going to kind of add that to the debt at the back end. Well, you know what's going to happen at the back end, right, folks? The people who think they're getting helped, who are taking that temporary lifeline because they're desperate, they're going to lose their house. And the outfit that stepped in to quote unquote help them is going to be the new owner of the house, and they're going to be the tenant. Look at all the oligarchs that are part of the fascist state, unfortunately, that is developing right now. The BlackRocks, the Vanguards, there's a host of them that are buying private properties, that are buying single-family homes, that are buying apartments. And we're not talking about a few. We're talking about millions of units and then renting them back to people. This is not an isolated thing. This is a trend. And this is a trend that's predicated on the deliberate acts and lack of acts by the Federal Reserve. And while the Federal Reserve is pretending to fight inflation to help the common man, you know, to help employment, you know, because that's their mandate, fight inflation and keep full employment. The Treasury, and I brought you this in the radio show, about 3 weeks ago or so? The Treasury is embarked on an opposite, absolutely opposite fiscal course. The Treasury is doling out money like crazy. That's why we have a $1 trillion every 3-month addition to the deficit and the debt. That's the Treasury. That's Janet Yellen. If you want to have an interesting exercise, go back and just Google up Janet Yellen's early writings. Janet Yellen is a Marxist. That's what she is. And she's a Marxist who likes to make money for herself, of course, and her elite friends. So you have these two diametrically opposed forces, both trying to pretend that they're helping you, when in fact the combination is undermining your ability to purchase, your ability to rent, your ability to have housing, and to own private property. And of course, if you're desperate, you have to rent from somebody. You have to sell to somebody if you can't afford what you have. And oh, isn't that nice? The oligarchy is there to help you. We are here to help. You just give us that deed and you can live there for the next 2 years. We even fix your rent for you. And this is happening all over. And then we have all this exacerbated by the Green New Deal, because it's all part of the same plan. I mean, the Green New Deal says we're going to be electric everything. Really? So, in the face of a scarcity of commodities, an underfunded mining and extraction industry worldwide for the last 20 years, which has created the shortage of copper, of silver, of all sorts of things which you need to have an electric world, you have increased expenses of construction, of let's do that over there, Jen, of modernizing the grid, of upgrading the grid, of moving everybody to quote unquote electric. You know, they're going to take your gas stoves, folks. Gas stoves are 1/3 the cost, 1/3 the operating cost of an electric stove. Gas dryers are 1/3 to 1/4 the cost of a gas dryer. Why would they be imposing all these additional costs on you? Why is insurance skyrocketing? Because insurance companies are dealing with all sorts of government regulations and edicts and mandates. Why is all the costs of everything increasing so that you are struggling to afford everything? Your food, your house, your insurance, your high interest rate mortgage, your ability to purchase a house to begin with, your ability to rent a place to begin with. None of this is an accident, and it's all treason, by the way. But none of this is an accident, and it's happening throughout the Western world. Do you want to know why we're in conflicts with China and Russia and others like them? It has nothing to do with saving democracy. I mean, please, give me a break. It has to do with the fact that they have realized, the globalists in the West, that China and Russia aren't going to play the global game. China wants to be the kingpin. Russia wants to be left alone. They are nationalists. They believe in their sovereign state, and they want to maintain their sovereign independence. That doesn't work too well with the globalist concept in the West, does it? Which puts us at foundational odds with them. And then you can throw in the currencies, and you can throw in the competition over resources, which we're getting our butts kicked on, although we shouldn't be. That's a discussion for another day, because that's intentional too. I mean, the more you import and the less you do at home, the more it costs. And the more it costs, the greater the strain on the middle class. And the greater the strain on the middle class, the less able they are to afford private property. It's amazing how all that works, isn't it? And I'm simplifying it, but I think you follow it. So now we have, after all these policies, after the unveiling of the globalists in the 1990s, their evolution through the manufactured financial crises of 79 through 82, through the late 90s, through the 2000 dot-com bust, through the 07 through 09 great financial crisis, through the absolute conjure of the COVID nonsense. And now, right, we see the progression. And with each progression, the foundation develops a bigger crack. The financial system comes under greater strain. The common man loses ground, can afford less. Everything costs more, can own less. And listen, since the property is out there, the houses are built, the apartments exist. If you can't own it, who's going to? Who could that be? Oh, it must be our friends at BlackRock and Vanguard and Fidelity and you name it. The list is endless. And then we have the overspending, which is intentional, not only of the stimulus monies, these trillion-dollar bills, which the progressive Marxists got passed because, the Republican conservatives didn't have the spine to say no. We have the waste of money. In China, when they stimulate their economy, the money goes into bridges and ports and factories and making stuff. When we waste money over here, it goes into buying votes, social programs, hundreds of billions of dollars for illegal aliens, their cell phones, their credit cards that they're issued, their housing, their health care, their Social Security. Oh, yeah, they're trying to get them Social Security because, Social Security is a very solvent deal, folks. Yeah. And the more this spirals, the greater the dependency of the common man, of the middle class, on the government. or on the henchmen of the government, the BlackRocks, the Vanguards, the oligarchy, the fascist state, the combination of big business and government. And it's intentional, and it's treasonous beyond description. And of course, along the way, they tweak it. They make it even worse by increasing regulations, by increasing mandates, by taking land through zoning and all sorts of other games out of circulation so it can't be built on, making buildable land more scarce and therefore more expensive and therefore more unaffordable. And they're doing the same thing, and we're going to discuss this next week, and I have just some shocking stuff to share with you that's happening right now, like over the last 30 days, never mind what they've been working on for years, in terms of what they're doing to agricultural properties, ranch properties, rural properties, and land. Quite intentionally and quite insidiously, and in some cases, like the forest fires in Canada, what happened in Hawaii. Absolutely, intentionally. It's all designed to divest the common man of his and her private property so that it can be owned by them and rented to you, the common man. And it's treason. Downright, flat out, in your face, not even cleverly disguised anymore, treason. And maybe worse than that. Maybe worse than that. But that's a discussion for next week. Please, pound the subscribe button, would you? Hit the bell, hit the like. We want to build people on these channels. We want to build subscribers. And the more subscribers we have, the better the impact we will have, the better the interview guests we will have, and we have a bunch of them lined up. Feel free to go to the ontherightsideradio.com site. It's a wealth of information. It has all the videos, all the articles that I've been talking about in this video. You can read them in depth. Many of them have links to further information if you want it. I don't bring you anything we can't back up. And some of these things, I mean, I just only have time to hit the broad brush. But some of these things, when you get into the details, when you follow the rabbit hole of the story through the links in the story, are simply breathtaking. Breathtaking. Listen to that video by Dr. David Martin, him addressing the European Parliament. It's just one example. Watch the videos of Fauci's testimony, of Garland's testimony. I mean, this is irrefutable stuff. It's right in front of your eyes. It's coming into your ears. You can't deny it. And I think you'll see how I get to the conclusions I do about what is treason, why there's treason, and what we need to do about it. They need to be held accountable. This is Reid Lance Rosenthal on the Right Side Radio and the Cowboys Take video channels. We'll talk to you next week. Keep the wind at your back.